Welcome to Real Talk on Islam Live, where we will bring in our panelists who in the first part of the show will discuss interesting theological topics from the perspective of Islam. And in the second part, they will answer your questions. Our topic today is the existence of God.
I think you must realize that some people are going to go to your show at the planetarium and they're going to say, aha, those scientists have discovered God, because God, dark matter, is what holds this universe together.
So is that a question?
It's a statement. You know they're going to say that.
So the history of discovery, particularly cosmic discovery, but discovery in general, scientific discovery, is one where at any given moment there's a frontier. And there tends to be an urge for people, especially religious people, to assert that across that boundary into the unknown lies the handiwork of God. This shows up a lot. Newton even said it. He had his laws of gravity and motion, and he was explaining the moon and the planet. He was there. He doesn't mention God for any of that. And then he gets to the limits of what his equations can calculate. So can't quite figure this out. Maybe God steps in and makes it right every now and then. That's where he invoked God. And Ptolemy, he bet on the wrong horse, but he was a brilliant guy. He formulated the geocentric universe with Earth in the middle. This is where we got epicycles and the machinations of the heavens. There was still a mystery to him. He looked up and uttered the following words: when I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies. These are the planets going through retrograde and back. The mysteries of the earth. When I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies, I no longer touch earth with my feet. I stand in the presence of Zeus himself and take my fill of ambrosia. What he did was he didn't invoke Zeus to account for the rock that he's standing on or the air he's breathing. It was this point of mystery. And in gets invoked God. This, over time, has been described by philosophers as the God of the gaps. Mm-hmm. If that's where you're going to put your God in this world, then God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance. If that's how you're going to invoke God, if God is the mystery of the universe, these mysteries, we're tackling these mysteries one by one. If you're going to stay religious at the end of the conversation, God has to be more to you than just where science has yet to tread. So to the person who says, maybe dark matter is God, if the only reason why you're saying it's because it's a mystery, then get ready to have that undone.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Welcome to our 8th episode of Real Talk on Islam Live. It's been quite a journey, and today our topic is the existence of God. So it's a very vast topic and a difficult topic to traverse through based on what your individual belief is. Of course, if you're not a believer in God versus a believer in God. But before we begin, I want to introduce our panelists today. We have our regular guest, Imam Daniel Qureshi. He's a recent graduate of Jamia Ahmadiyya School of Theology, serving in the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, USA, Harrisburg area. And then we have our, I would say, a very interesting guest today, Brother Damon Stengel, and he is a convert to Islam and Ahmadiyyat. He converted a few years ago to the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community. So he will be joining us in discussing this interesting topic today. Of course, we are sponsored by the Outreach Department of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community USA. And we are part of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community worldwide organization headed by our spiritual leader, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih V, may Allah be his helper, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad. And our community, the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community worldwide, was founded by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the promised Messiah, peace be on him, in 1889 on the precepts of the precepts of peace and the understanding and submission to God. And the teachings of Islam are a living teaching in our perspective, and we try to, as practicing Muslims, we try to abide by those teachings as best as we can, but that this community is based off of the teachings of Islam and the Holy Quran. We're going to use the platform of the Holy Quran, of course, and the writings of the Promised Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. And today we're also going to use some excerpts or references from the book Our God. It was written by Hazrat Mirza Bashir Ahmad. May Allah be pleased with him. He was the brother of the second Khalifa of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad. May Allah be pleased with him. And he wrote this book in response to allegations by atheists against the existence of God. So we're going to use some references from that. Now, let's get to the topic of the existence of God. Imam Daniel, what do you make of the God of the gaps? We have these objections that atheists raise on the existence of God. So, for instance, I'll name some of them. Like God is not, you're not able to see God, or, from the perspective of all five senses, not just visually. But at the same time, the creation of the universe is defined by the laws. So I think that our video was kind of alluding to that. Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying that, if you're just putting your whole belief on the system of that, the mystery of the universe is explained by God, well, then eventually, you're going to dwindle the argument that God exists at all, because you may eventually in the near future, when you become advanced enough, you can probably understand most of the laws of the universe and just say, the laws of the universe are the responsible for what you're seeing. So what do you make of the God of the gaps, what he was talking about? Should we put our efforts and ideas into these mysteries and say, do you agree with what he was saying?
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Thank you for having me once again. To a point, what he was saying is correct. If you are dependent for your God to exist in the realm of existence where science has not made discoveries yet, then you're in for a rude awakening. Because if we look back 100 years, someone who had that belief, their entire belief of God has been crushed over the past 100 years of scientific discovery. Whereas for us, our God exists within and around and behind all of those discoveries. Our belief in God is that he is everything that leads to those discoveries and everything that has led to those discoveries being made initially. You were mentioning how people say that you can't see God, you can't touch God, you can't sense him with his five senses. But there are other senses in which we use to see the existence of God, to feel the existence of God, spiritual senses. In previous episodes, we talked about how the existence of a spiritual realm and how our sense of spirituality is the tool by which we experience God. For an example, if we are talking about looking at an atom, our eyes cannot look at an atom. We cannot see an atom with our plain eyes. We have to use a microscope. And we have to increase the intensity of the level of that microscope each time to get a closer view of that atom. In the same way, our spirituality is like a microscope. And we have to increase the intensity of the level of our spirituality for us to truly experience God.
I agree with you there. if it was just our five senses, that would be enough for us to explain the mysteries of the universe, then there will be a lot of mystery because we won't be able to perceive any of what's going on. For instance, in the book Our God, Mirza Bashir Ahmad explains how magnetism is something that we can't see. When you pull all of the iron filings from, with the power of the magnet, you can't see the magnetic waves that are around, working their way around and attracting the iron based on some atomic properties, right? So, and then, if we're talking about even something more esoteric, love. Can we see love? Sentiments of love. So, but we understand it exists. It doesn't even have a physical realm where it exists. It exists somewhere within what we call, even metaphorically, the heart. So, I would say even that it would be absurd to just say that that I am not able to see God, therefore God does not exist. Would that be a correct way of understanding this accusation? Because we're not limited to even in the scientific realm, we're not limited to the use of our five senses. We need to go beyond them to understand. So, where do you think? Where do you think we're going with this in the sense of logic? Like, how do we get to understand God if we're just trying to logically understand him, Imam Daniel? So where are we going with this in the sense of logic?
In the sense of logic, we have to look at the idea that if evidence exists for a thing, then we have to use those evidence to examine and come to a conclusion. There was a story where a desert nomad was asked by someone what proof he had for his belief in God. In the Bedouin, the nomad said that when I go through a forest and I see a camel's dung on the ground, I understand that a camel has passed by. In the same way, whenever we talk about the belief in the existence of God, if we look around at the existence of nature, laws of nature, the existence of creation, these are all evidences that we have to look at and logically assume that there is something behind their creation. Nothing can just come from nothing. There had to have been something at the very beginning which caused all this to become.
And we're going to get into some of that with a video that I'll show you shortly. But I want to come to Brother Damon. Brother Damon, just because you're logically concluding that God exists, does that mean that that from your perspective he exists? Is logic enough?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. No, absolutely not. Because it is true that most humans can come to the conclusion that there should be a God. However, that can only get you so much. It's not going to get you to the is part, that God does exist, because there's still an element of doubt in it. And this is the mistake that from the Islamic perspective that the deistic philosophers over the centuries have made, because even though they said that there should be a God, they still denied the power of prayers, and they still denied like the power of miracles.
So, there's also the sense of and I would kind of allude to our God again. He gave a wonderful analogy where if you perceive a threat of some sort, you take precautions, right? But you're not taking precautions because the threat is actually real now. You're perceiving the threat to be real, or presuming that it could harm you in any way. So you take precautions. for instance, if you're camping out in the jungle and you're about to go to sleep, you would need somebody to watch over your encampment, because you don't necessarily want to be completely unprepared if something were to materialize, like a beast of the jungle or some other perceived threat. So in the case of the existence of God, when we believe in the idea of God, Brother Damon, isn't it, would there be any sense of loss if we follow the teachings that we usually associate with the belief of God? There wouldn't be any sense of loss, would there? Like doing all the good things and feeding the poor, or even from the perspective of your own personal self, you improve things by, for instance, you won't steal because of the fear of God. You won't commit any other acts that would be immoral because of the fear of God. So there's no sense of loss, is there? Just because you believe in God, and hypothetically saying that we're just taking the idea of the existence of God, not the actual belief that He does exist. Even if you just believe in the idea and follow the precautions, that there's no sense of loss, is there?
No. Like for the existence of God, like for those who refrain from doing certain things, the thing that with that you still don't really have the sense of is because there's a limiting factor in one's, because even though they might not do certain things, they might do a certain set of other things, if I understood your question correctly.
Yep. Well, I guess my question was that you're following a set of principles, and you're trying to do the best you can because you believe that by believing in God, you're going to be protected against these things, right? But hypothetically, let's say if God doesn't exist, there wouldn't be any sense of loss. You did all the good things that actually made you a little bit better, a better human being. So even if the concept of God or actual God, it doesn't exist, you still made your situation better, because equally looking at from people who don't believe in God versus the people who do believe in God, the only difference is you're following a set of principles that are actually helping you, while the other group of people may or may not follow those principles on their own and could be left to do other things that might be that might take away things from them, maybe a sense of loss. So the whole point is that even the belief in God, there's nothing that's being taken away from you, even if, God forbid, God does not exist. You still are in a better place, right? In the end, you just improved yourself. So Imam Daniel, I think that's where we need to kind of have that understanding. And Brother Damon kind of brought up a good point of ought to exist versus actually exist. And I think this correlates with the three principles of the three grades of certainty. Can you explain what those are, the three grades of certainty that we kind of we mentioned in the past with some other episodes? How would that relate to the experience of God?
Yeah, so the three grades of certainty, first being ilmul yaqeen, or the certainty through knowledge or inference. This is the idea that you understand and you believe completely due to having an understanding and being able to infer through knowledge that you received regarding a certain matter. Ainul yaqeen is certainty through sight, meaning that you have seen this thing for yourself with your own vision. You know it exists because it has come into your vision and you've seen it. Haqqul yaqeen is certainty through experience. This is something that you have gone through. You have lived it. You have experienced it. You have felt it. All three of these are ways for you to understand the truth and existence behind something.
And we did an episode on the experience of God and what that entails, and how actually experience of God is what will be the next step for you to understand if God does exist. So logic can only take you so far, but the experience part comes later. Now, I wanted to kind of go back to some of the other objections. Brother Damon, when we're talking about natural laws, they say that everything can be explained by natural laws. So, so why do we need to even hold the notion if there's still mystery outside, that God exists, because eventually that mystery will be resolved, right? So if that's going to be resolved, why are we still holding to the notion, of God's existence? Because I think in the grand scheme of things, what they're saying is that, and this is where Mirza Bashir Ahmad kind of said it, they kind of say the absence of evidence is the evidence for the absence. So because we haven't found anything yet, so that just shows you that there's not going to be anything at all. And perceptively, we haven't detected God from the scientific measurements, from the five senses that we have as a human being. So where are we going in terms of natural laws? And we'll discuss the proofs at the very end, but that will kind of shed some light on this. But when we're talking about natural laws, can natural laws explain all of the things that we need to, and we don't need a God, Brother Damon?
Well, the thing is, this is a thing that I like to use when responding to these objections by atheists. Basically what I'd ask them is that, okay, then why does science say that there's a thing called phenomena? Because even though we can't really explain things, we can make a hypothesis about how things work, yet we are absolutely certain that these things happen because we have seen it with our own two eyes, even though we don't know how to explain it, but yet the fact is those things are there. In no way does natural laws disprove the existence of God, because science, according to the atheists themselves, is an ever-continuing study of the natural universe. So what that implies is that it's an everlasting study and that they're never going to find everything in time.
Yeah, I mean, Mirza Bashir Ahmad states that per the state of the current thinkers, science is about studying the universe, and one of the main things is that the universe seems to go from a very primitive state to a complex state. So it is a natural order of things, number one. But the other thing is, he actually states that that's actually a evidence for God, because he says if viewed carefully, the initial state of matter, as it is described, correctly or incorrectly, is even more wondrous and baffling than the present universe. Obviously, the initial state was a seed for the present universe, and every wise person can understand that a seed is more wonderful and profound because although small in size and simple in form, it has all the potential powers, qualities, perfections hidden in it that subsequently unfold into a tree. Thus, the initial primitive state of this universe proves it to be even more profound and mysterious, constitutes further evidence for the existence of a creator of this universe. So basically, even the idea of it going from a complex state, from a simpler state to a complex state, is wondrous. How is that possible? That you have this built-in mechanism already. When we're talking about the universe, it started from such a small state it's not even, we can't even fathom the idea of how small it was before it began, from the scientific understanding. And then it resulted into this complexity that we see right now, and where it's going, and we coming out of it as a complex life form inside this universe. So it's not something that's doing away with the idea. So we're not associating God in mystery. We're associating God in the whole scheme of things, of how it's all working together. Even the laws that we know, how they're intricately intertwined. Now we get to the subject of the ultimate cause. If we go and talk about the ultimate cause, Imam Daniel, then who created God? That's kind of the objection that kind of comes in. If you're talking about from one step to another step, there has to be something that caused all of this, then who created that cause? So it kind of becomes a very cyclical thing to understand. So how does the ultimate cause, how does that work? What is the ultimate cause?
So I think for here, we can actually go to a lecture of the second caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, Hazrat Mirza Ahmad. And he quotes from the Holy Quran, chapter 67, verse 2 and 5. Blessed is he in whose hand is the kingdom, and he has power over all things, who has created death and life that he might try you. Which of you is best in deeds, and he is the mighty, the most forgiving, who has created 7 heavens in harmony. No incongruity canst thou see in the creation of the gracious God. Look again. See you any flaw? Look again. Thy sight will only return to you confused and fatigued. At the beginning of the universe, there has to be an origin. There has to be something that started it. We cannot simply claim that the universe came about spontaneously. Even science doesn't agree with that. There has to be a cause. And if we look at it at a more simple level, imagine a painting being made and just aimlessly splashing color onto the canvas. You can't have a picture come out of that. It will just be a mess of colors. In the same way, you cannot just throw creation in a single point and expect it to come out with any sort of conformity or any sort of creation that is intelligent. There has to be someone behind it. There has to be something behind it that sets up the systems in place and designs it to come out complete and beautiful as it has.
And this sets up for the video that I'm about to play. Basically, nothing comes out of nothing. So how can something come out of nothing? We can't. We need an eternal cause, something that is always there, a primary cause, something that was outside of the limitations of this universe. Because if you look at the universe, with each cause and effect, it eventually will have to have a limitation of where it will end and where the first cause would start everything. Because this is a limited universe. It's not an eternal universe. So you need eternity. So I'm going to play this video kind of explaining that point.
I have a question. Is there an answer to like how God came to be or how he was created? Or
Okay, please sit down. We know how you came to be very well. But let me tell you one thing. If everything came to be, then nothing is eternal. Is that right? Huh? Nothing is eternal. When nothing is eternal, how it came to be? You understand? Let's start with this premise. If everything has to come to be one day, everything which exists must begin somewhere, then there is no eternity. Right? So, when there was nothing, how anything came to be? You understand the point? So, you can't do away with eternity. There has to be eternity. Otherwise, it's absolutely illogical to believe in anything. So, if there is eternity, the question is simply this: is it a conscious eternity or a dead eternity? Because we see organization in existence, so the eternity has to be conscious. Because dead eternity cannot lead to life. Only life can lead to life. All right? Thank you. And it's a good question. Thank you very much for asking this question. Assalamu alaikum.
So that explains the point of the cause. You need an eternal factor in there, and that's not something that's in question logically. But what is in question is that eternal factor conscious. And so now we get to the point of proving the existence of God, and we're going to kind of go off of a proof that Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the Promised Messiah, wrote in his book, Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam. And he kind of stated it in a step-by-step fashion. So he said that every living and non-living thing, and this is all based off of the Holy Quranic, the teachings from the Holy Quran, that every living and non-living thing has a proper form. So when we talk about the animals, the living things on Earth, every living thing, and even the inanimate things, we are curious to know how each one of them developed the proper form. And this comes from the verse Quran 20, verse 51. So chapter 20, verse 51, that each of these things, the living things and non-living things, how did they have a proper form just exactly the way that they're supposed to, and they stop exactly what we need and what everything else needs. So there's a scientific phenomena when we talk about living things, specifically something called apoptosis. And that's very interesting too, because this is cell programmed to die when they're growing to develop something, like our organs or even our bodily form. So all of us, everything in our body is part of some sort of an organ or some sort of a body part that acts in unison to make us a whole human being. And each of these things have cells that basically developed or grew to a particular form and size for their functionality to be proper. So this is not something that the Promised Messiah is just saying as an observation. This is a scientifically understood principle. The second thing is the ultimate cause of all things is God, because he's outside of the limitations of the universe, which has a beginning and rely on an ultimate cause. So that's what we were discussing about the eternal cause, what Imam Daniel was alluding to, that it is to the cause that exists outside of the limitations of all of the cause and effects within this universe. So it has to be something that is outside, something eternal. And we're saying it has a consciousness attached to it. Then the universe is regulated. When we look at the verse of the Holy Quran, and this one is actually related to, and I'll read the verse exactly because it kind of fits exactly with how the regulation works. It is not for the sun to overtake the moon, nor can the night outstrip the day. This is all of them float in an orbit. Chapter 36, verse 41 in the Quran. So the Promised Messiah is, peace be on him, saying that there is a regulator of these laws of the universe. So just because the laws are the one driving all of these things that we see, we can't just stop there and say, well, because of our limited understanding, we'll just say the laws are the ones that are driving the entire thing. But when we look at the order of things, even the constant of the universe, there's a constant in the universe. And this is a scientific proven principle as well, which is actually calculated. This constant of the universe, they determined, theoretical physicists determined that if this constant was off by even a few, orders of magnitude, we would not be here as living beings. We would not be here. So who created the first cause is very important because the final outcome is dependent on that. And that's another proof. And then prophets of God themselves. The prophets of God are actually proof because they were the ones that in the Holy Quran, it says in chapter 14, they were the ones who were asking, we are indeed only men like yourselves, meaning the people who were rejecting them, but Allah bestows favor on whomever he wills and from his servants, and it is not for us to bring you proof except by the command of Allah. So they're talking about the revelation they're receiving, the divine communication they're receiving from themselves. And that's the only time they communicate to mankind. And then the answer is that the second verse, which is the verse number 12 of chapter 14, it says, the Quran answers the question of the disbelievers that if prophets are really sent by an omnipotent being like God, then why are the prophets human beings and not some extraordinary human beings? Imam Daniel, I'll let you answer this. Why do you think they were human beings and not some extraordinary human beings? What is the Quran alluding to? What is the benefit of them being human beings?
Well, the benefit of them being human being is that the rest of us are human beings. They are the example to lead us. If they were some superhuman, supernatural beings, how could we have ever followed them or followed in their footsteps or followed their examples? They were sent for us to lead us towards the discovery of God. And to do so, they had to be like us as well.
And that's a perfect answer to that question. And it makes sense as well. And the final proof that the promised Messiah kind of alludes to is that every soul knows the existence of God automatically. It's designed within its make. So the question that says in chapter 7, verse 73, "Am I not your Lord?" They say, "Yeah, we do bear witness." The soul is bear witnessing to the existence of God. And this is where the promised Messiah states, God Almighty sets forth in the form of a story the characteristic with which he has invested the souls, and that is that by its very nature, no soul can deny the existence of God. So, Brother Damon, knowing all of that, isn't Allah sufficient? Isn't Allah sufficient for us? Then, knowing all of that, why do we need anything else? We know that He's our Creator, and our souls can't deny the existence of God. So, isn't Allah sufficient for us in knowing that He exists? Isn't He what we need? And
Yes,
this is actually a verse in the Quran, chapter 39, verse 37. Is not Allah sufficient for His servants?
yes. So basically, what the Holy Quran tells us about human nature is that it tells us, I believe, in chapter 30, where it says, follow the nature that Allah has put in the soul, which will lead you to the right path. And I'm paraphrasing here. And this implies that every soul knows for certain that Allah exists, but basically the choice is left to us whether or not we want to accept that or not. But at the end of the day, when we think really deeply, we know that Allah exists. Now, there's a reason why, in terms of atheism, most of them call themselves agnostics, because they are basically admitting that we cannot completely deny the existence of God, but we just choose to be atheists anyway. And I guess I find that very interesting, because that to me is just a proof of what the Holy Quran has been telling us 1400 years ago.
And knowing your background, I just wanted to ask you a question. What led you to the belief in the existence of God and to this point, and stay firm on that belief? What is that journey that you took?
Well, I would say that you have to have honesty within yourself, and I'm naturally a very honest person. Even in the days that I was an atheist, I was just naturally honest. I naturally had a good heart. I'd say like a good example is Abu Bakr, the first caliph of Islam. What led him to Islam was that he loved the person of Muhammad, and he didn't like ask for any proofs. He just said, I just want you to tell me that you are the messenger, and I accept you. And I'd say in that sense, I had a very similar experience. Like when I converted, I felt I had no reason to deny the existence. I felt certain in my heart that this is the right path that I'm following. And there was no reason for me to doubt. I just knew. It's a phenomena.
And obviously, from the standpoint of belief and acceptance, it was an arduous journey. It wasn't an easy journey. It was a difficult journey for you. So we're not saying that it's a very easy journey for people to accept, right? It's something that takes time and effort to eventually come to an understanding.
Yes, of course. And of course, like what I've said is only like a summary of the past 5 years of me being an Ahmadiyya Muslim. It does take time to continue to improve one's personal qualities, and in the Islamic belief, you have to rely on the power of Allah alone. You cannot rely on yourself, because that'll only get you so far. It's not gonna lead you to the ultimate success. But rather, if you rely on God, just as the Holy Quran says, is Allah not sufficient for His servants? Then that's what's going to lead you to the ultimate success, and that's what puts the confidence in me to keep on going in this beautiful faith.
And we're very glad that you have kind of inspired many people in that area, including myself. I believe this path requires effort, and it is something that doesn't come easy. But with knowing what we talked about, I think it's a good starting place to kind of think about these questions and what we said today. And remember those three grades of certainty. See where you are in that area. And if you're at the lowest area, then take time to understand how much effort would it take you to get to the next point until you get to the point of experiencing God yourself. And even with the scientific understanding, you can't base a final conclusion without doing any experimentation. You can hypothesize, and then you test those hypotheses. So even with the understanding and experiencing God, you have to first practice what we are saying and what we're talking about in order to get to the final point of certainty, which is the certainty through experience. So it's a long effort, but I think even from the scientific understanding and the scientific perspective, you have to still make the effort to run the experiment through and eventually reach your own personal conclusions after you're doing it without making prejudgments of what the final conclusions are. Obviously, from the logical standpoint, we've tried our best to convey it, and these are not the end-all logical conclusions. There are many other arguments that we can make in the face of the existence of God, and of course, there are other arguments that atheists might make as well. So this episode is not going to talk about all of them; otherwise, we'll be here forever. And keeping in respect to the time and how much we usually, how much time we put in these shows, I want to kind of conclude with saying thank you very much for joining us today with this with this wonderful conversation, a very interesting conversation. Of course, there will be other shows in the near future that might explore deeper things related with the existence of God, and we hope you join us for those as well. This is the final episode of this season, and we will come back again with season 2 in March. First episode, March 6th. So hopefully you will be able to join us again. And thank you very much for supporting us. And if you have not subscribed, please do subscribe to our channel for future notifications of shows. So Jazakallah, and I thank our panelists for joining us today as well. They were wonderful, and they offered profound insights to these profound topics that we were discussing today. So Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Thank you for joining us today as we had an in-depth discussion on the topic of the existence of God. We hope you enjoyed it. This was the last episode of this season. Please join us next season beginning in March with the first episode on March 6th. We hope that our first season was informative enough for you to keep watching these shows, and we appreciate any feedback you can give us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel below for the notifications of future shows.